Hi, I hope everyone's doing well. Today's management theory is all about stress. I've been thinking a lot about this video and I thought it was a good time to do it because this video is really for people who are interested in learning more about stress and what to do about it. I've designed it to explain the difference between acute short-term stress versus the continuous chronic long-term stress and the big difference between the two. And also how to fix this workplace stress problems that we're seeing today, and also to work on your own personal stress plan as well. So let's start off today's management theory with the fact that it's getting worse. We are all feeling more stressed lately. The weight on our shoulders, some days when the stress is over, all we can do is sit on the couch and lay on there and binge on Netflix. We're seeing that 80% of workplace accidents come from stress-related incidents. 33% of people report feeling extreme stress, and 48% of people saying that stress hurts their personal and professional life. A trend report by John Elfein indicates that at the start of the 2020 COVID pandemic, 54% of Canadians were feeling more stressed than the previous month, and this was in the March-April period of 2020. And that has been steadily increasing. We're seeing that the average is roughly between 20 to 25%, where the average stress has increased for Canadians month to month. In other words, people are feeling more stressed and then they feel less for it. So how many of us are also catching ourselves doom scrolling, consuming a lot of negative news, which is spiraling us into anger, depression, or worse? And let's talk about the different stress types. Everyone is experiencing collective trauma right now, or what's called chronic trauma, and not the acute stress or what is known as short-term stress. Short-term stress can actually be healthy. Long-term stress is not, which is called continuous or chronic stress. And so we have to be addressing this situation in the workplace and also in our personal lives. This low level of chronic stress is actually causing us to be more anxious and evolving our responses in unhealthy ways. Some of us are drinking more, as we see in some of the recent studies. We're vegetating, we're not exercising, we're not eating healthy. Our resilience can only last for so long. And so what we're starting to see is the population starting to get more depression, irritable, sad, and unhealthy. And so let's talk a little bit about how COVID has been affecting us. At the beginning of 2021, we're beginning to really understand the impact of COVID-19 and this pandemic of 2020 and what's created for us. We see people concerned about social economic concerns, contamination fears, xenophobia, traumatic stress, and compulsive checking of all the latest news. 56% of Canadians say they are feeling increased levels of stress or anxiety as a result of COVID-19. And if you're younger, it's affecting you particularly more so. For example, 20% of young adults were screened for depression disorders versus only 7% of adults 65 years and older. So we're seeing different age groups reacting differently to the stress. This includes depressive disorders, generalized anxiety, and a form of PTSD. For younger people, the research is highlighting that the pandemic will affect their future career outlook. They're worried about that the future seems downright impossible for them. Their traditional milestones like leaving home, getting married, celebrating their graduations, taking summer vacations, and traveling have all but disappeared. Things that some of us that are older experienced in our 20s and 30s. This group is feeling like they're missing out on their life right now. We're also seeing 1 in 4 women screening positive for stress disorders versus only 17% of men. The research is showing that women are facing much more stress right now because of childcare issues and responsibilities, in addition to trying to work from home at the same time. And so I'm going to put a link at the very bottom of this YouTube video where you can reference the Healthline survey, which highlights this data that I just shared. And the stress that we're seeing is really transferring into the workplace. It's getting worse, but we can fix it by understanding it first. And what are the common workplace stressors that we have? Normally we see organizational constraints where the company might not have enough resources, interpersonal conflict, which is the most common form of workplace stress, where you're having a fight with a coworker, and where you have work overload, where there's just too much work. And we're seeing that happen right now in the workplace with companies downsizing their staff to survive. And so we see a lot more work overload and low task control, where you just don't feel a lot of control. And we're seeing that this personal life stress is also fueling the stress in the workplace more as well, and we need to do something about it. So let's talk about the general adaptation syndrome, GAS. It describes basically the pattern of responses that our body goes through after being prompted by a stressor. It really involves three stages of the alarm reaction, which activates our fight or flight response, resistance, where we see that our employees struggle to concentrate or become irritable, and exhaustion, which is the third stage, where we see ourselves getting tired, depressed, anxious, or feeling unable to cope. And the reason why I want to share this general adaptation syndrome, because it's really important to understand this concept, because in the alarm reaction is the first phase is where we have to address stress before it comes to resistance, stage 2 and stage 3 and exhaustion. And what we see, and I'll talk about this in some of the research on how to address this situation with the alarm reaction. So why do others, coworkers and friends of ours, seem to handle stress differently? Well, we see that in the research that it comes down to people with a better physical health deal with stress better. You know, they're exercising. They have stress coping strategies, which we'll talk about further along this video. They have a really good personality in terms of being extroverted and also have a positive outlook. And they also have a positive self-concept about themselves. So that positivity really seems to really play well into how people deal with stress. So one thing that people always ask me as students in class and managers when we talk about this stress concept is that how do we see professional athletes, soldiers, celebrities, and successful people react is quite different. You know, the way I like to describe it, I'll use this first book. Musashi, this is a book called The Book of Five Rings. It's a very famous book out there, but there's a little article in here which I can talk about here, which he talks about as a swordsman comparing the path of Heiho to that of a carpenter and how important it is. Where one of the important concepts that Musashi talked a lot about in how dealing with challenges and stress is that you have to practice so much like a master carpenter so that you can actually read wood well. You know exactly how to handle the wood. You know everything, all the qualities about wood. And what he meant by all of this is that if you want to handle stress, the importance is to practice your skills so well that eventually you get so good at it that stress means nothing to you. Right, and that's I think that's important theory around the concept of this, because it really relates to a lot of what comes from Zen Buddhism. And if you guys ever seen the Big Lebowski, and Jeff Bridges wrote this book with Bernie on the concepts of Zen Buddhism, because I think it's also important because Jeff talks a lot about this concept. And one thing I want to bring to you is how do some celebrities deal with this, is that it talks about the concept of the Tibetan Lojong practices, which people handle stress better are the ones that always maintain a joyful mind, right? They appreciate the struggles as opportunities to wake up. And I love this Lojong practices because it really talks about how some people deal with stress better because they have these stress coping concept of always maintaining a joyful mind, appreciating the struggles as opportunities to wake up. And I love this. So if you're just getting introduced to Zen Buddhism, this might be a fun book written by Jeff Bridges to introduce you, and it's called The Dude and the Zen Master, and it's a fun book to read. Or watch Big Lebowski. You learn a lot about Buddhism through that as well. The other book that I can also recommend is The Happiness Advantage by Sean Anker. He does some fantastic TED Talks, which we'll talk about, and some other lectures. But he talks a lot about some of these concepts of how to manage stress well and who does manage stress well. And he talks about this principle. It's the habits. You know, a lot of times we are the bundle of habits that make us. And it's precisely because these habits are so automatic that we rarely stop and think about how enormous of a role that they play in shaping our behavior and in fact our lives. So maintaining a positive focus tends to make us a lot more happier, and this is a great book on that concept of happiness as well. And how do you manage stress organizationally? Well, we need to create a workplace culture that takes center stage. So Employees have a positive perception that the organization has an authentic wellness culture and are generally less stressed in the workplace. So what this means is that the research shows that organizations that invest heavily in terms of creating a really strong workplace culture tends to make happier employees that actually handle stress very easily. Sanofi Canada did a recent healthcare survey in 2020, and 90% of employees felt satisfied with their job, relative to only 61% of those who felt their organization had a poor wellness culture. So that meant that investing in a strong wellness culture really improved people's ability to handle stress. And what is a wellness culture? The research shows that it talks about an organization that feels safe, has good relationships with coworkers, you have a good relationship with your immediate supervisor, you have strong HR policies, the organization focuses on socializing and taking breaks with each other. The organization tries to always create a reasonable workload and create a relaxed atmosphere in all its interactions. And I'll put a link to that Sanofi Canada survey below if you want to look into it a little bit more as well. So now that we know how to manage stress in the workplace, how do we manage stress personally? I think most of you guys have been looking forward to this element. Well, there's some strategies of removing the stressor, choosing in some cases to leave that job or not hang around those people that add stress to your life. Using humor. It's a really important concept because what we see in all the research is that finding funny humor in the workplace adds to reducing stress. Controlling the stress consequences with a healthy lifestyle and fitness and exercise. Receiving emotional support from your coworkers. One research shows that having a positive morning wake-up routine is so critical to managing stress. Getting more sleep, connecting with others, connecting with your community, designating more personal me time. There's research also talks about listening to music and dancing a lot, taking breaks, and also cognitive behavior therapy or CBT therapy, which includes things such as body scanning, muscle relaxation, guided imagery, breathing techniques, meditating. And one of the most important things that we see also in the research to managing stress is having a sense of purpose is enormous. It allows people to cope with a lot of adversity. Finding ways of being service and having a sense of purpose is enormous because I'll use this example written by Jocko Willink, who talks about this book called Extreme Ownership. And you see examples of how Navy SEALs create this and foster this sense of purpose within their teams so that when they're under enormous pressure, in this case, getting shot at, they have a really strong sense of purpose when they're dealing with this adversity as well. And I think Jocko talks a lot about that and how important is how they handle stress. In element here on page 162, 163 of Extreme Ownership, these military leaders talk a lot about how important it is to prioritize and execute, which is always just focus on dealing with it rather than avoiding it. And I think that's one thing that's in an application to business is so critical and in our personal lives is a lot of times stress can we can get overwhelmed with stress because we don't attempt to deal with it because we try to bury it and try to avoid it. And I think this book really talks about how important it is to own that problem, right? And the other element is that I want to share with you is changing your perceptions about stress. You can't change stress, but we can change how we see it. And Dr. Michael Evans does this fantastic video called the 90-10 rule, which I'll put in the links below, which you can watch, which talks a lot about how important it is. The people that manage stress well are the ones that see stress as different. They see it as a way of energizing themselves. They see it as a way of challenging themselves. And it's a good example, which I bring to you today, which is from this book called Tools of Titans, which talks a lot about what celebrities and really famous athletes do to be managing the stress. There's one element which is called Mind Training 101, which is on page 149, which the author Tim Ferriss talks a lot about is that more than 80% of the top performers in life who he has interviewed have some form of daily meditation and mindfulness practice. And I think that's so important, is that these mindfulness practices are so critical. And like, for example, sometimes simply doing nothing. Andy Puddicombe does a great TED talk on this in terms of practicing guiding your thoughts in 10 mindful minutes, which I'll put a link below, and which guides your thoughts and controls your emotions. And the last one I'll also talk about is Kelly McGonigal's video from a TED Talk around how to make stress your friend, which is also a useful exercise in managing your stress as well. I think what I wanted to do today is give you access to a whole bunch of research articles on how stress is affecting us and where it's going right now at the exact moment, but also some tools on how to handle that stress and some literature out there that really is fantastic in how to deal with stress in the workplace. Because as I see it, and I'm sure you guys do too, is that stress is increasing in the workplace. And we can look at all sorts of great literature, all the way from soldiers' experiences to martial artists' experiences, to monks' perspectives on Zen Buddhism, and also the psychology professors that talk a lot about what is driving stress within the workplace. Because that combination of all these articles and literature, I hope you find very interesting on how to deal with stress in your workplace, but also deal with it yourself, because it's becoming a pretty rampant problem, as the surveys are showing us right now, especially during the 2020-2021 pandemic, with all of us on lockdown and stuck at home. So hopefully you find this interesting, and let me know what kind of practice you decide to try. I'd love to hear about it in the comment section and read, and we can talk about what you recommend in terms of how you deal with stress for others. So hope you liked this video, and if you did, just put a like and subscribe and do all that kind of fancy stuff. And thanks for watching today. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.